Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dualistic Unity movie review series. I am appreciating being reality and the little things and just all the things that come with being being Andrew, but recognizing that that's not solely the extent of what I am, and I guess I'm just appreciative of that recognition that there isn't anywhere else that I would rather be than right here, right now.
And I'm always amazed by the fact that very little in my life has to change. And yet everything can, simply based on the level of clarity that I find myself in. That when I'm confused, I will perceive my life in a certain way and I will respond to my life in that way. And it will cause further confusion. And yet, when I am clear, when I'm able to actually be present in the moment, let go of my judgment, let go of my need, everything in my life seems perfectly appropriate, almost as if I had designed it. And it always amazes me that that is the case, that nothing else has changed except my view of myself and my view of my role within reality. And yet that changes everything that I do from there on in. It's incredible. It's miraculous, even. And the reason I bring that up is because this movie review is about Bruce Almighty, which came out in 2003. It stars Jim Carrey, Jennifer Aniston, Morgan Freeman, Steve Carell, and Catherine Bell. This movie is amazing. There is so much in this movie in terms of insight. There are some great lines. There's some fantastic acting. And of course, it's hilarious to watch. If you haven't watched the movie already, I definitely encourage you to do so before you listen to the rest of this episode because there will be spoilers. But if I had to narrow down this movie to any one theme, I would very much narrow it down to perspective, how powerful our perspective is and how much it shapes our life and our view of the universe. And so before I go any further, I'm going to pass it to Andrew and get his initial thoughts.
Oh yeah, there's a lot, and I have a shitload of notes for this one, so I'm excited to dig in. There's a lot of quotes in here that I think have a lot of depth and are probably seen in a different way depending on your own perspective that you have of yourself, reality, etc. As you're watching the movie. Like, are you watching it from the perspective of the individual or the perspective of being God? Because it's going to absolutely hit different if you're watching it from the perspective of being God. And I really saw it kind of broken down into three parts, and that perspective shift being the middle part, because part one and part three, the situation that he's in aren't really different, living the same type of life, but through the recognition that it comes down to him, that really he's being God the entire time, and all that changes is his perspective and recognition that the idea of God and the reality of being that idea of what we think God is isn't as glorious as it may seem. And so yeah, between the three parts, I won't get too into all of that yet. But yeah, in terms of part one, it's interesting because even just throughout the entire movie, it's always in flow the whole time. Like, everything is perfectly appropriate to getting to that end, and yet he has a certain perspective of it. Even the viewer has a certain perspective, like, oh, that didn't have to happen, or that's a bummer, or oh, that maybe he didn't have to go through that. It's like, no, he had to go through all of it to get to that end point. But yeah, I saw part one very much caught up in being an idea, and that idea being inherently divided from everything, caught up in things like want, perception of lack, and desiring for his life to be better and for someone to save him outside of himself.
That's a good point. It's interesting how his self perception also very much changed his perception of God, right? Because while Bruce is a funny and lighthearted person who lifts people up just by being around them, because that's what he does, he has ambitions and he has a direction that he wants his character to go in that's self-defining, that's going to raise his value and make him more. And so it conflicts with who he is. He is already in the state of mind that could make the most out of each and every moment, but he's not focused on the moment. And so I find it so very interesting that here he is being just a ray of sunlight for so many people. And yet he voices, God, why do you hate me? And it really is just a lack of perspective. And there is a crescendo in this movie. Like there is this resistance that you can feel building between who Bruce is and who Bruce wants to be. And reality just keeps causing conflict because the person that Bruce is isn't necessarily the person that Bruce thinks he should be. He's funny. He's like, maybe I should be more like Evan, who's not funny. Then I'd be anchor material and I'd get the thing that I want. It's right. But Evan's an asshole. You don't want to be an asshole. So do you want to give up who you are to become who you think you should be? Or do you want to look at who you are? I thought that was just incredible because it's really about perspective, like even down to the traffic jam. Because again, this is really a buildup as everything is working against Bruce's ideal narrative. And he's just getting more and more upset. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but when he was stuck in traffic and he's shaking the car and he's all frustrated because he's late for the meeting where he's thinking that he might get that promotion or at least word about that promotion. And he actually says, this is my luck, as somebody is being wheeled by in a stretcher to the ambulance. He actually says, this is my luck. Like it's so bad while somebody else is potentially dying and he doesn't even see it.
And that's really just a great example of just what the entire first part is about. Is he's always caught up in himself. He's so fucking caught up in the idea of himself that he's not aware of anything that's happening. And that lack of awareness is the thing that's actually getting in the way, that takes away from his ability to recognize all of the potential in each and every moment. And he's so caught up in himself, like even, getting to that traffic jam, he's like, he wakes up late. He's caught up in bed because he's thinking about himself. I want to sleep more. And then drives Grace to work, still caught up in himself. Got the blood drive, got the kids. He's like, nah, none of that. I don't need blood's supposed to stay inside me. Just completely lost in the idea of himself. And he's like, oh, now I got to get to work on time. And it was all his things that caused him to get caught in that. And he's just so honed in and so focused on himself and what he wants that he's not able to see anything outside of those desires. And so he's talking to Grace and he's just saying how, I'm a victim. I'm not okay with a mediocre life. Like I have all these things and I'm not okay with it. And Grace brings up that it's always about him, and because she starts saying something about herself and he's like, oh, don't make it about you. And she's like, how could I ever possibly make it about me? It's always about you. And then he blames her again, making him feel guilty. Oh, side of guilt. Thanks a lot, Grace. And it's just it's right in front of him that he's always thinking about himself. He's so lost in the narrative. And it's just so obvious how much that is causing all of his conflict with reality. And then he leaves, he's driving and then it's like, God, give me a sign. And there's all the fucking signs in front of him. Like, stop, turn around, caution ahead, blah, 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 blah. And he's so caught up in just thinking about himself that he's not even aware of any of the things happening around him ever. There is zero sensitivity to reality because he's so lost in Bruce and what everything means about Bruce.
Yeah, it's really interesting how lost in that he gets, because that really is what leads to his meltdown, is the fact that he's so focused on getting this thing that's going to make his life better that even the slightest hint that he may get that raise is immediately translated into, he practically told me, Grace, I'm going to get it. It's going to happen. And he was all built up like this was going to happen. I'm going to get my moment. And then it all fell out from underneath him. And of course, Evan, who is an asshole, uses his line about community and the cookie metaphor and all that as he's accepting the job. And it's just the final straw for Bruce. That's enough. And he snaps, but it's because of how fixated he was. It's because of how fixated on that end goal he was that fall was so precipitous. Because had he not been so invested in the idea that his life would be better if he could just get what he wants, he would have dealt with it with a degree of grace, oddly enough. So this very much leads to his perspective of God, because to him, God is all powerful, right? So therefore, if God is all powerful, God could just do whatever God wants. God would have control. God could fix my life in 5 minutes, completely disregarding the fact that his life is connected to everybody else's life, that to change Bruce's life, you would have to change everything. And he's not looking at that. He's looking at the fact that control equals getting what I want, which equals happiness. That for once, I just want God to think of me. And he's forgetting everything. And yeah, I love the moment where he's like, give me a sign. And there's a bunch of signs saying, caution, beware, slow down, that kind of thing. And he doesn't pay attention to it at all because of that same tunnel vision. And it ends up leading him to an accident. And he screams out, answer me. And we have all felt like that. We have all cried out to the universe, what the fuck? And wouldn't it be great to have an answer? And that's very much why I love this movie, about the fact that reality created a character to represent it, and you can talk to it. And it's brilliant in how it's done. And again, credit to Morgan Freeman being possibly the best person I could imagine to play God. Because when Bruce meets God, he very much is in this mentality of, if things just changed, my life would be perfect. And yet God is very much aware that everything is already doing what it's supposed to do. It's just that Bruce doesn't see it. And so I love the fact that when Bruce meets God, he kind of shirks off the, what? You want me to mop the floor with you? Yeah, okay. I'll see you at the 7th at 7. And God's like, the 7th at 7 it is, because that was already what was going to happen. The entirety of Bruce's story was already going to happen. That's the most beautiful part about God's character, is that God just let it happen, which is really what Bruce needed to do. That's the lesson that Bruce needed to learn, was to let things happen, to be a part of them rather than trying to get what he wants all the time. Beautifully done.
Yeah, absolutely. And that scene of meeting God is kind of where that first part I was talking about comes to an end, right before he gets all of God's powers. But there's a line. So when he's meeting God, and he's in the building, and God comes down, and he's like, "Oh man, that's a pretty bright light you got up there." And Morgan Freeman responds, "Yeah, the light is too bright for most people. They spend their lives in the dark trying to hide from me." And that one fucking hit. So I wanted to just like pause on that for a sec, because from the perspective of being an individual, a believer, whatever it may be, you would think, oh, they're saying, you should believe in God, you're avoiding God and all that stuff. But what I saw it as was that everyone's hiding from the recognition that they are God, hiding from that recognition that they are it. And we've talked about it many times in many episodes, that so much of what we do in our lives through believing the idea of ourselves to be the truth, whether we recognize this or not, is us avoiding the reality of being God. And that bright light, it's too bright for too many people. Like, there's a lot there, as we see throughout this movie. It being recognizing that you're God, being God, having all the powers, it's a double-edged sword, like with everything, and may not be quite as amazing and glorious as it may seem. Like, being God isn't this thing that's better necessarily, but it's different. Like, there isn't this sort of hierarchy that we create in our minds and we've created in our society, but it's very much, it's another type of experience that has the potential to be incredible, but it comes down to you, which is no different than what you're doing right now. So yeah, that line just hit me very very hard. But yeah, that whole scene was fascinating, and then gets into the next part, which is him sort of getting his powers.
I really enjoy all of the little subtle things that they throw into that scene. Like the building, for example, is called Omnipresence, which I thought was really good. Or the different floors of the different room numbers. Two of them were creative and destructive. which I thought was fantastic. That was really good as well. One of the things I thought was really funny was after Bruce kind of gets told the deal, like, I'm God and you're going to be God. He goes through this transition phase where at first he's totally resistant to it. He still doesn't believe that he just met God. Like, he runs away from the building. He walks on water. His car starts. He's like, just start. And it starts. And so everything's immediately working out well for him. And what does he say? Oh, it's luck. And how often do we do that? How often do we assume that we're so disconnected from things that things going well is just luck, as opposed to you quite literally being reality, not necessarily as resistant as you have been, right? Suddenly you're God. Things change. So I thought that was really good. He moves the sugar, and of course he causes the soup to part like the Red Sea, which was fantastic, because that's the thing, is that you would start to experiment with power. And with that temptation for power goes the temptation to control. And that's where everything can kind of go off the rails. And I love the fact that God knows that. God is aware that Bruce is going to go on this entire cycle. And he does. But I appreciated the two rules, which I thought was really interesting. You can't tell anyone. And I thought that one was kind of tongue in cheek, because even if you did tell anyone, they wouldn't understand you, which is really funny. So you literally can't tell anyone because they couldn't take it in. They don't have the clarity to see it. And you can't mess with free will, which is, of course, perfect, because everything is God's will. You can't mess with your own will. It's your will. So I thought that was really interesting as well. And then when he has stopped panicking and God comes back and meets him in the diner and says, we should talk about this now. And they're out walking on the water. Bruce says one thing, and I loved this. I don't know if you caught it or not. He said, can I ask why? And God just says, yes, you can. And there was no further answer to that. It was just, yeah, you can. You can ask anything. I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, and that eventually comes full circle towards the end when, he says that's everyone's problem. Everyone's always looking up because, everyone's always asking why this, why that, as opposed to recognizing that they're just it. And like, your perspective totally shifts. Like, the conversation totally changes when you recognize that you're it. It's not even that you start asking the same questions of why, even the question of like, why are we here? Why are we here on Earth? It's like, what do you mean? You are here. You are the here. You are the now. What do you mean? Why are you here? Like, those questions don't even make any sense from that perspective anymore. But the two rules I found very interesting because, can't tell anyone you're God. I didn't think of that, no one would get it anyway. But yeah, I mean, because it's funny because we're always saying this. Like, we're literally saying it all the time. I've started out videos like, you're God. I'm you. You're God. What if you were God? Blah, 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 blah. And then people, like, we see it in real time. We see this play out on fucking Instagram and TikTok in the comments. People are like coming up with all different sorts of ideas, to avoid that recognition. And that's, the light is too bright for most people. They spend their entire lives avoiding this light. We literally see it in all the content that we create, because we are doing that. So it's funny that, he says you can't do it, but you just literally can't. And then you can't mess with free will. It's throughout the entire movie, I find it interesting because we see it as God from the perspective of being God as an individual, but there's still so much that is the recognition that you're also everyone and everything. And so getting into sort of the part two of having all the powers and everything beyond, he starts out by like doing all the magic tricks and whatnot, but then reality starts to settle in. And it's like, oh no, being God means taking care of yourself. And all of a sudden, he wakes up the next day and he's got all these fucking voices in his head. And I think that hit me in through the recognition that it's not just, it's not just an individual, being God means being everything, means being everyone. And so that is the responsibility aspect. You know, the whole Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. That's very much the case throughout, you know, this sort of what I saw as part two of the movie, was getting the powers, but also recognizing the nature of actually being God. It's not just about the magic tricks and all of that. Like, everything you do has secondary, tertiary implications to everything. And so, because in this sort of early on in the second part, he's solely focused on himself, he doesn't recognize the implications of those things. So he starts hearing the voices. He just wants to deal with them, make his life easier, says yes to everyone. There's all sorts of shit that happens there. You know, he's talking with Grace on the balcony, brings the moon in, causes a tsunami on the other side of the world, like starts still focused on himself, even being God. He's still very much focused on the egotistical character, and he wants to get his job back, be the best news anchor. So he starts making all these things happen to get all the news stories, meteor hits, causes all these power outages. Like, there's all these secondary implications that people don't recognize would be the case to this. So we're so solely focused on what I want, what I want to get out of this, and don't understand that what we want isn't always what's best for us. And so, you know, part two is very much, especially early on, once he gets his powers, it's all about him. It's all about his life, making his life better. Even says, like, oh, I had to right a few wrongs in my life. And I love how they show all of the implications of all of the things that he does that you don't think are that big of a deal. It's like, oh, he just wants to bring the moon closer to impress Grace a little bit. And it's like, it causes a whole fucking tsunami and a bunch of death on the other side. So it really brings all of those powers back down to earth in a way. It grounds them in recognizing that, oh, maybe that isn't the best way to utilize these capabilities.
By the end of that second act, yeah, he finally gets the point. But it's so interesting that because Bruce is still very much fixated on the idea that if he gets what he wants, he'll be happy. As he starts responding to the prayers, his immediate assumption is if everybody gets what they want, they'll be happy. And it's a very simplistic and superficial view. And you start seeing it play out, like the one lady who's like, I lost 47 pounds on the Krispy Kreme diet, right? Or somebody's stocks tripled, or everybody won the lottery, and so the whole thing was worth $17 to each and every person. And so this idea that getting what we want is what's best for us is really a superficial view, but you don't recognize that necessarily when you're focused on it, because you're focused on it, so you're not going to question it. There's that level of cognitive dissonance, right? So that was the most simple thing he could have done, was just say yes to everybody, and it saved him time, which is really what his focus was. He's like, this is going to take forever, because after responding to so many prayers, there was twice as many prayers. And I think this is really interesting, because there is this insight that comes with not getting what you want over and over and over again, that you can do with what you have. And what you start to see is opportunity, but you also start to learn humility. You start to learn empathy. You start to see other people going through things, because you're not just getting what you want, and you can recognize that other people aren't getting what they want either. And that brings us closer together. That creates community, that creates compassion. And so that is the perspective of the whole, that we are all working together all the time, but we get off track in focusing on what we want. And what I enjoy about Bruce's journey is that he was so focused on the things that he wanted that the repercussions of doing so ultimately cost him the thing he wanted in the end. That he actually couldn't be an anchor, because the riots kept happening, the power kept going out, everything was working against him. Despite the fact that he controlled his way there, the consequences actually took it away from him. And that is very much the case with all of us. We try to control our way to an end result. And even if we get it, we are no longer the person that can appreciate it. So we don't actually get it. I thought that was just fantastic.
Yeah, I like that a lot, that we discount the mentality that we embody along the way. So we get to the point of getting all the things that we want, and we're not even able to appreciate it, because we've kind of cultivated this mentality of getting what we want all the time. And then so you get it, and it's like, well, you don't even know what to do with it in that state. And so eventually, it gets to the point where he trying to control everyone, everything, get everything that he wants. And he gets to a point, and obviously that kiss scene. But before the kiss scene, just another quote that I found pretty funny is he's walking into the party, and he's all like, big shot, best Mr. Exclusive and everything. And he says, everyone be fruitful and do long division, as opposed to be fruitful and multiply, because he had just dealt with all the fucking voices in his head, and he recognized, like, maybe we don't need more people. And so I found that insight to be very funny. But getting to the into the party, and then Grace sees him kissing the other anchor, and she gets mad, and it kind of turns into this whole thing, as opposed to him getting everything he wants. He had that thing that he wanted all along, being Grace's love, and then he loses that, and now that's the only thing that he wants, and he does everything he possibly can, besides having the ability to impact her free will to try and get her back. Shows her all the signs, does all these crazy ass things, and it's still not enough. And eventually it gets to a point where he does try and control her, and just love me, just love me. And she says, I did. And he kind of blew it. So yeah, eventually there's that shift from trying to get everything he wants to getting the thing back that he always had. And I just saw that to be very symbolic of recognizing that if we're not attentive to where we're at, we may be missing that, the thing we really wanted deep down all along was what we had all along.
And that actually leads to possibly one of my favorite conversations in the entire movie, which was between Bruce and God. How do you make someone love you without affecting free will? And God says, now that's the question. Because that's exactly it, right? And that's our relationship with the universe. That's our relationship with reality. We can't love it until we get out of the way and recognize that we're it, right? But as long as we have this idea of ourselves, we can't love reality. We can't love God. We can't love ourselves, right? And so the universe is constantly wrestling with this. Like, how do I get back in touch with myself without forcing it? Because in forcing it, I know there's an equal and opposite reaction, because I'm just forcing myself. And so the real question is inner peace on a collective level. How do we accomplish that? And it's just through self-acceptance. I thought that was such a profound part of the movie, and it's probably often overlooked, but that is the question. How do you make someone love you without affecting free will? You can't. And if you love them, you won't.
Which kind of starts to get into part 3, when he finally lets go of that, and he's talking to God, and he basically lets go of his need for her, and stops. This is the shift from being God thinking about himself to being God and thinking about reality. Like, and this shift I see, when he finally lets go of the desire to get Grace, he's like, I don't want her anymore. I want her to be happy. I want what's best for her. And so in part 1, it was very much, the idea of being an idea, being Bruce. And then it was the idea that we all have of being God, the almighty, powerful. And then finally, part 3 is the reality of being God. And so it starts out with him still having the powers and whatnot, but starts doing everything for everyone else, helps the guy with his car. He's sitting in traffic, not like moving it and everything, just kind of letting go of that need for control, surrendering, and eventually still can't get Grace back. And even though he still has his powers, and then he's like, basically gives them up. And in both sides of that part 3 of being the reality of God, it's like starting out with the powers and not really using them, because he finally understands the implications, the potential implications that he doesn't know will happen. But if he's so focused on getting what he wants, there's going to be implications to surrendering the powers, to not wanting them anymore, and still being the reality of God. And so I think that shift from, letting go of the need to have Grace and just thinking about what's best for her, thinking about what's best for everyone else. And the guy, when he pushes the guy's car, he responds, "God bless you," or something like that, and he just kind of smirks and smiles, which we do all the time, which is funny. But yeah, part three is very much just that the initial parts, that shift from being the idea of God to being the reality of God, which Bruce always was.
Yeah, it's the realization of true power, which isn't changing reality at a whim, but rather the gentle nudge of just being there for someone when you can. And that really is it. And it's so interesting what you're saying. God bless you. And he kind of smirked. It's like, I just did that for myself. Right. Like that is God in action. So I think there was a pretty big insight there for Bruce. But what I thought was really interesting, and again, this goes back to how beautiful and perfectly circular this movie is that Bruce has his moment where he literally says, I surrender to your will. And then he gets hit by a truck, which is great. But when he's talking to God, what he says about Grace is that, no, I don't want her back. I want someone to see her always as I do now through your eyes. So I want someone who sees her from the perspective of God, someone who accepts her for what she is without requiring anything from her, somebody who sees her whole and complete now. And I thought that that was such an interesting way to wrap up Bruce's story, because then he comes back having a near-death experience, which of course Grace doesn't know that he was ever God or anything like that. But in that near-death experience, we often do get a glimpse at how lucky we are to have people in our lives. We often do get a glimpse of how much we've taken them for granted. So I thought that was rather seamless. But the other thing that was seamless was that throughout the entire time that Bruce had all of the powers of God and was trying to get what he wanted, it never once occurred to him to take himself down, to actually tear himself down in order to increase the connection with everything else. And so it wasn't until he hit rock bottom, that he was hit by a car, just came back to life, that Grace came back, recognized how much she loved him, and it was just perfectly seamless to the point where he's just like, oh, now you're just showing off. Because that had been in motion for the entirety of the movie. Everything that was going to happen. And again, right down to the point of Bruce and God mopping the floor on the 7th at 7. Everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. And the only thing that changed by the end was that Bruce thought less about himself and was able to actually be the miracle, as God said, because we are all God, and that is the miracle.
Amen. Yeah, that's that finishing touch on the movie definitely hit home as well. It's kind of the same perspective I have with manifestation. It's like when you're looking for things to manifest, all of these things that you want, all of these miracles to happen, you want to be able to perform miracles. It's like, no, you are the miracle. You are the manifestation. You're already it. And that's the thing that he was missing in part one was recognizing that he was unable to recognize that he was already it, and then was able to get a glimpse into all of the things that he wanted and recognize, finally part three comes around and he's like, oh, goes back to living the same, like the movie ends with the same exact thing as it starts with, doing the field reporting for the same bakery and making jokes and doing the same thing, but because his entire perspective has shifted, everything shifted, and it on the surface seems like nothing's different, but same time everything's different. And that's really the shift that is available to each and every one of us, is letting go of the perception of ourself as being the truth of what we are, and thinking that things should be at all different than they are ever, and surrendering to quote unquote God's will, which is just your will, but not the idea of you, but the reality beyond that.
Yeah, there was one significant difference between the beginning of the movie and the end, which was that the beginning of the movie was very much reflective of Bruce's mentality that he was doing it on his own. There was nobody there for him. At the end of the movie, he was surrounded by people who loved him, surrounded by people who appreciated the humor that he brought, the attitude that he had, the person that he was. Everything changed because Bruce changed. His perspective, his priorities, everything about his life changed in just that he accepted himself. I love the part with the boss where he turns down the anchor job, finally gives it to Evan, and then says something along the lines of, "What's that? You want me to debase myself or to make a bunch of other people laugh? Sure, I can do that." And he does so happily, recognizing that that is a miracle. To bring a little levity, to make somebody's day a little lighter, that is the best you can do for anyone. And it really does come down to you just accepting yourself so you can laugh too. That really is it. So I was really glad that we covered this movie. And admittedly, this is our third Jim Carrey movie. So just like Bill Murray, Jim, if you're listening, you get a free coffee. Just get in touch with us. To be honest, though, all jesting aside, I think that a lot of people really miss the point of this movie. I don't even know if it was written necessarily with this in mind, but it would almost have to be for it to be this clear. So at some point when Jim comes on the show, I look forward to asking him all about it. But this was a blast. Thanks so much for watching this one with me, Andrew. I look forward to what we do there next week.
Yeah, likewise. It makes me wonder with how clear this movie seems, at least, to us and probably everyone listening who watched it. It makes me wonder with Jim's sort of waking up how much of an impact this had and how much of a role this movie, as much as all of his movies, and the recognition that, the characters he played were no different than the character of Jim, but this one specifically, it must have hit home. I can only imagine, because the character that he plays in here is very much similar to Jim Carrey's character in his real life, that I have in quotes. But yeah, it's a incredible movie. It was fun to go back to it from the mentality that I have now, especially because I saw it probably back 15 years ago or so, and yeah, definitely hit differently this time. So I'm glad we were able to cover it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. As always, we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.